Lynx Air goes bankrupt. So for those of you who don't know what Lynx Air is or was in this case, it was one of the only few discount airlines that we had here in Canada. So I believe they only started operations in 2022. So it was very recently that they started flying. And then I think this was earlier last week, right after we did the show for last week. So I couldn't fit it in, but it happened like literally a few minutes after we concluded the show that I got the email that they were going bankrupt. So with Lynx Air gone, the only airline or the only big kind of discount airline left in Canada would be Flair Airlines. And then I think, some people consider WestJet to be a discount airline as well, but I think WestJet is, starting to get up there to be sort of like a mid-tier one. And then, of course, we have Air Canada, which is, the national airline, which is the biggest airline in Canada. But yeah, with Lynx gone, there's not too many airlines left that are Canadian based. So, it was a sad story to see them gone because I have flown Lynx Air personally before. And I can attest to their kind of bare bonesness. Like it wasn't anything special. In fact, it was extremely mediocre of an experience. However, because it's so bare bones, it is like very cheap, right? So when I flew Lynx Air, there's no screen on the seat in front of you, and I believe there's no like plug either, so you can't even plug your phone in to charge. So it was literally like they strip out everything, and you just get put in a seat for like 5 hours or however long your flight is. So that was kind of my experience, but I think I took Lynx Air to Calgary, from Toronto to Calgary, when I went to go visit these two guys last time. And this was only a few months ago. And I believe my whole round trip was like $200. It was just over 200 after taxes and everything. So it was extremely cheap. But yeah, so let me throw this question back to you guys. What have you guys flown on Lynx Air? What's your experience? And what do you think's going to happen to kind of the landscape of Canadian airlines after Lynx's demise?
I actually have like a huge input for this. So to answer your question first, I recently also have flown Lynx airline. I went from Calgary to Las Vegas, and like Andy was saying, completely bare bones. There's no TV on the screen, and you can't really plug your like iPhone or Android phone for like charging. You just get to your destination. That's about it. And honestly, I never had a problem with that. It's nice to have like a cheaper option when you're flying. And funny story, I never told you guys, but so my girlfriend is doing her master's and she went back to Toronto to visit her family, but I stayed here. But she took Lynx airline, and funny enough, she took the last ever flight Lynx airline commissioned out from Toronto to Calgary the night before. So like Lynx airline officially closed, what is it, this past Monday, something like that, or like Monday before this past, whatever. She flew on the Sunday before, Sunday night. So like that's pretty crazy. She flew on the last ever flight ever. But yeah, otherwise I never had an issue with Lynx. It's fine. It just kind of sucks because now we just have to rely on Flair Airlines, which is kind of a bummer. Like Europe has like so many other. I mean, I know Ryanair. I don't know if there's others, but I think there are. For us, there used to be like Swoop Airline, but then Swoop joined with WestJet. And then now there's no more Lynx, which sucks. So Flair is like the only option. But if Flair's not cheap sometimes, we can't really cross-relate which flight we want to take. So it's really a bummer, really. I hope another low-cost airline comes along. Because if you're just going from Calgary to Toronto, like I don't want to spend those Air Canada prices if I don't need to. I'll say that.
Yeah. Just to butt in before Trista, I think it's funny that you mentioned Swoop because when I was like doing research, I was like, really? We only have two discount airlines in Canada? Like, there's got to be more than two, right? And then I forgot that Soup existed, but the reason why I forgot was because they got acquired by WestJet, right? So there's even more consolidation in Canada now, so that like I guess Porter is the other one that I missed. So Porter Airlines is kind of also a discount airlines, but for Toronto at least, they mostly fly out of Billy Bishop Airport, which is the Center Island Airport. So, for those of you who don't know Toronto, we have two airports. There's Pearson International, which is YYZ, which is the big airport that kind of, if you're traveling, especially internationally, chances are you're flying into that one. But there's a smaller Center Island airport that's much closer to downtown Toronto itself. But that one is obviously smaller, so it's for smaller planes, and Porter Airlines is kind of operating out of that one. So yeah, I guess that leaves only two discount airlines, Porter and Flair now, with Lynx gone. But yeah, Tristan, what do you think?
So I've flown with Lynx a few times, and actually I've had pretty reasonable experiences with them, especially compared to Flair. In my experience, Flair tended to be much more sticklers for bag size and like your personal item, and they were typically a lot slower, and they seemed more intent to squeeze additional dollars out of you at every opportunity, which made them less desirable than Lynx. So I flew with Lynx a couple times, and they were pretty reasonably priced compared to other options. So I would say that I'm definitely disappointed that they're gone. And it's not really great to have that have another one of our discount airlines go down.
Let me toss a question back to you. Do you think that the fact that Flair was more of an asshole contributed to the fact that they're still standing and Lynx is bankrupt?
I think Flair is chronically walking the line of bankruptcy as it is. So I think that I don't think it's them being more of an asshole that actually contributes that much, because to be frank, I'm fairly certain that people were more annoyed and less likely to fly with Flair because of the hassle than the additional gain in money that they would have gotten from, charging people for one extra bag, right? I feel like that's a big contributing factor that is not often concerned. But again, when you're comparing, alternative is flying with WestJet or Air Canada, who are both a lot more expensive. You're probably not going to want to spend that additional amount of money, even if you have a better experience, because at the end of the day, you're only on the plane for X number of hours, right? Once you get to your destination, it's the same getting off of Flair as it is getting off of Air Canada. You're at your destination, and I think that's a big factor. Because, like, for example, like, I don't care about the lack of TVs on Flair, because whatever, it doesn't matter if I can entertain myself for the duration of the flight without a little TV in front of me. But if that's going to be a cost savings, I'm good with that.
Yeah, it's like a Toyota gets you to the point A to point B the same speed as a Ferrari, because unless you're speeding, which is illegal, it's like you're driving in, let's say, in traffic, then it doesn't matter if you're in a Toyota or a Ferrari, right? Like, you're gonna get to point B in the same amount of time. And yeah, that's a good point, and that's how I kind of think about it too. And yeah, actually earlier I was gonna share a personal story of mine that's somewhat related, which is that in 2018, so I think this was November of 2018, I went to Iceland for a vacation, and back then there was an Icelandic airline called WOW Air. And I remember it very clearly because a round trip from Toronto to Reykjavik, which is the capital of Iceland, was $350 on WOW Air, where it would be, like, granted, this was 2018, so this was pre-pandemic, so pre like big inflation, but still, you know, $350 for round trip from Toronto to Reykjavik back then, even that was like a crazy price, right? So I remember that if you were to book the same flight on Icelandic Air, which is the big airline, kind of their version of the, you know, national airline, um, then it would be like easily more than double the price of WoW Air. So you know, I didn't even like believe the price at first when I saw it. So I was like, oh, let me book it. So I booked it, and you know, sure enough, like $350 round trip. Like it was like Lynx Air. You know, there's no TV in the back, in the seat in front of you, and there's I think there was actually plugs where you can plug in your phone, but I might have been mistaken on that. But regardless, like it's very bare bones, right? And then like they don't serve food other than like some water on the way. So yeah, I was like, but still, I was like, wow, $350 when you're flying across the entire like Atlantic Ocean, basically, and back. I was like, how are they making money? And clearly they weren't because they went bankrupt, and they went bankrupt so suddenly that this happened like after I came back. So I wasn't affected by this, but like it was maybe like 6 months to a year after my trip. They just suddenly announced their bankruptcy one day, and they did it in a much worse way than Lynx Air did, where Lynx Air at least gave you a warning. But when WoW Air went bankrupt, it was like we're ceasing operations immediately. And there were people that were at the airport trying to catch a connecting flight to their next WoW Air flight to get home. And they couldn't because they were just like the airline just went kaput like so fast that they couldn't get on the flight that they already booked when they were already at the airport. So a lot of people got trapped at like random airports across the world because they couldn't get on their WoW Air flight. So yeah, that was kind of another, I guess, experience or another example of how difficult it is to run a discount airline because it is a very cutthroat business, right? And on that note, I do want to throw it back to you guys. Do you think that the fact that Lynx Air went bankrupt, do you think that that has anything to do with the Bank of Canada raising interest rates, right? Because, you know, the raising of interest rates, we know, puts a lot of pressure on businesses, right? So in the email that Lynx Air sent as to why they went bankrupt, they you know, cited compounding financial pressures associated with fuel costs, inflation, and extensive competitive tensions. But you know, inflation is of course a factor, and I don't think they want to just like go all out and blame like the Bank of Canada or the Canadian government, because that wouldn't be like good for them reputationally, I guess. But I think like on one hand is inflation, but on the other hand, I think it's also maybe the fact that interest rates have gone up, like it has negatively affected them and caused them to end up where they did. Like, what do you guys think? Like, I don't want to impart my opinion on you guys, but just do you think interest rates have anything to do with this?
Just before we get into that, I just want to also say that I do know some people who actually were affected by the Lynx canceling, and they did not refund flights. So if you were on a Lynx flight, you just lost the money, and you didn't get to fly.
I believe you have to do it through your credit card, which really sucks for a lot of people if you don't have those insurances, right?
And there's no guarantee the credit card will let it go through.
Yeah, it's a drag.
Sorry.
And they didn't, and they don't take Amex too. Amex has the best strategy insurance for these types of situations. And you know, I would have paid for my Calgary flight using my Amex if they let me. And then I got on the website, I got to the last step when I was booking the ticket before I checked out, and it's like no Amex, Visa, MasterCard only. And yeah, it's like, you know, it depends. You better have a good Visa or MasterCard because you're not going to be covered under this Amex insurance.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Dom, you were going to say something?
Oh yeah, sure. So, just because we went like a little off there, could you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, I was just gonna
Sorry.
ask if do you think that rising interest rates, like the fact that the Bank of Canada raised interest rates so much so fast, has anything to do with Lynx Air going bankrupt, right? Because that wasn't one of the reasons they specifically cited for going bankrupt. They mostly cited inflation, which is why interest rates went up in the first place. But I think that on the other hand, if you were to really analyze it, um, rising interest rates makes it hard for businesses to do business, right? Because it slows down the entire economy. So, if you're like, even if you're a consumer and you have a bunch of debt and now your interest rate goes up, your mortgage goes up. Let's say if you have a variable rate mortgage, then you're gonna travel, you're gonna book less air travel probably, right? So, it's just from where I'm standing, it seems like that is a factor as well that they didn't mention specifically in their email. But do you agree with me that that is a factor, or do you think no, like it's only fuel costs and stuff like that?
No, I totally agree with you. I think it is part of like inflation as to why like things didn't work out well. So like typically airlines do really well during the summer. That's like peak for airlines. A lot of people want to travel, use their vacation time, whatnot. But during off season, it's already tough for airlines because not as many people want to travel. And I think these low cost airlines, as it is, go on like super thin margins just because they're trying to like make it cheaper for everyone, so they buy in the first place. But if there's no demand, then they're gonna like double screw themselves. So with the interest rates so high, so like interest rates high equals more expensive to borrow money. People are like less inclined to want to buy these tickets because they want to save for something else and not want to travel as much. So yeah, of course, I think these interest rate hikes do have a thing with the reasons to why Lynx closed down. And yeah, it's just really sad because like Porter is good, but like I don't need to drive in a Lexus. Like I'm okay with my Corolla, you know what I mean? Like Porter's kind of like that mid tier before going to like a Mercedes Benz or a Lambo, Air Canada. So yeah, it's really unfortunate, but I definitely agree. It has something to do with the interest rates and like carbon tax. But anyway,
I think on that front, also one thing that Dom didn't mention though that I think is a big factor is that most of these airlines don't own their planes outright, which means that if they're paying interest on the loan to own their jet and the interest rate is increasing, well, then the jet is becoming more expensive to fly. And if their margins are not increasing at the same rate, which they clearly aren't, because it's still difficult to convince people to travel as much, especially as Dom was saying with like the off season. I would say that it all kind of came together where Lynx presumably just ran out of capital to keep the ball rolling until their higher profit season. And part of that is probably due to the fact that the cost of their loans to hold for their planes will have increased. So I think that on that front, I think that's a big expense that we probably don't think about when we are thinking about the cost of running an airline.
Yeah, and where I was getting at with this kind of steering the conversation towards like economy and interest rates was that, like, I'll tell you my fear, right? So this is what I fear might happen. I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but let's just say, right? So Lynx goes bankrupt, and then what do you think happens to the price of air travel in Canada with less competition? The prices are probably going to go up, right? So if you're Flair, then you might have more room to raise your prices more now because there's less competition, right? And then that's going to be reflected in, say, the CPI numbers, right? Like that's going to be reflected in the inflation numbers because like the prices have gone up. So then the Bank of Canada, when they look at the next inflation report, they go, "Oh, why is I know, granted, like inflation is a mixture of everything, but it's not just air travel, but that's one factor that they do measure in the CPI report, right?" So they're going to look at let's say the air travel segment, and let's say if prices go up a lot, that might drag up the entire inflation report, depending on how much it goes up by, right? And then they're going to go, oh, inflation is up. Let's raise interest rates even more, right? Like, do you think that that's a possibility, or am I just being too paranoid?
I think you might be being a little bit too paranoid, because I don't think that air travel represents a sufficiently large portion of their inflation metrics to have it going up be a significant mover on that front. Like, maybe, but I don't think it would be that big of a bump. So I don't think it would be sufficient for the Bank of Canada to go, oh no, inflation has gone to the moon, compared to, like, say, additional grocery prices increasing. I feel like that would have a much larger impact on inflation than the airfare.
Yeah, well, just to kind of push back on that, maybe the air travel, it's not just like we think of air travel as just people, but like I know commercial airlines do carry cargo as well, right? So I'm concerned about maybe just, I know this is like, maybe I admit that this is probably a little paranoid. To be clear, I don't expect the Bank of Canada to all of a sudden start raising interest rates again. That's still like far from my base case, but I'm just saying, like, what if, right? Like, if uh I'm just worried about the fallout effects and the, kind of secondary effects from something that like this that just happened, right? So if Lynx airline goes bankrupt, what about other airlines, right? As you said, I don't imagine Flair to be rolling in money exactly either, right? I'm not implying that Flair's also going to go bankrupt, but there might be a possibility, right? Like, we'll have to see. But yeah, what do you think?
I guess I'll keep it like short and sweet. It might have like a little bit to do, or like it could be like a bad butterfly effect, quote unquote, so to speak. But it's hard to say if it's going to have like a huge significant impact on like like interest rates and inflation, and if that would cause a rate hike. It's hard to say, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think if another airline goes bankrupt, I think that would be a very big problem for like, if Flair goes bankrupt, I think we would actually have a pretty severe problem on the airfare price front. I think that we would see a lot of increases that we don't want.
Yeah, it's like, what if we were worried about the wrong sector this whole time, and we saw a bunch of regional banks in the U.S. go bankrupt last year, and then everyone's focused on the regional banks, and there's the credit event unfolding in the regional banks. What if the real credit event is like the discount airline apocalypse? Like, I don't know. Granted, like, I know airlines probably aren't as integrated into the financial system as banks, but I'm just saying, right? Like, if we have a bunch of discount airlines, and to be honest, there's not that many of them. We have a bunch of those just, going belly up left and right. I think that's a big cause for concern as well, right? So, mhm.
Who knows eventually, yeah. Just fingers crossed that Flair stays with us, because oh gosh, I don't know. I don't want to fly to Toronto for like $500+ when I could for like $200 round trip, like less. Ridiculous. But yeah, anyways, my thoughts. Corolla for the win.
Yeah, if you've got a place to stay and like the location that you're going to, like a friend's house, you can fly with like just a backpack for really cheap on Flair and such. So it'd be pretty rough if they're gone.